Well, it's great to see more of our graduate policy students join us as this program has moved along. I was telling somebody at lunch that it may have seemed that there was a real logic in how this agenda was set, because it is felt in some ways that I never would have perceived before we started, that beginning with the conversation around local government, then moving into the kind of theory and practice, and then coming up to look at Tocqueville and many of our modern issues, and now looking at Tocqueville in practice, concluding this afternoon with our last panel on social capital and how we can think about economics at the local level, that there was a real forethought to all this, but I have to say there wasn't. Much of our agenda is determined in part by who could make what days, but I take it as evidence of God's grace that it feels like this agenda has come together in just the right way. And certainly this next panel is going to be evidence of that. I would guess that Bob probably hated it when I first raised this in a conversation with him in Washington, D.C., a couple months ago, but this connection in the agenda between Josh's discussion around Tocqueville and this panel led by Bob Woodson, to me is very much a panel, a series of first talking about the world today and how Tocqueville speaks into it, but now as a banner of Tocqueville in practice. What does this actually look like? And so to have Bob Woodson, the legendary man that needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway, the founder of the Woodson Center, someone who, for many of us, is an example of how we put our faith and policy into practice, understanding the power of mediating institutions to heal the broken world that Josh alluded to before. Bob Woodson was the first speaker at a public event hosted by the School of Public Policy. And so to have him back here, he spoke at an event in Santa Monica just soon after we opened our doors in 1997. And so to have Bob back as we are celebrating our 25th anniversary is, again, another evidence of God's grace on this institution. I do want to point out our founding dean and the person who organized that event, Dean Wilburn. Jim Wilburn is with us here for this conversation and for this event. And so I'd just like to give our thanks to Dean Wilburn for joining us here today. So this next panel is titled What the Black Community Can Teach Us About Community. And Bob's work and the work of these panelists is certainly evidence of much of what we've talked about up to this point. What does engaged citizenship look like? What does claiming authority look like, to go back to Jeff's earlier distinction between power and authority? And how do we go about addressing these issues which seem so overwhelming? And I think in some ways they're cast in that way of being so overwhelming that we can only rely on government to handle it. But as we'll see here, engaged citizens, out of their love of community and one another, are doing incredible things, as they always have in this country. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Bob Woodson.
First of all, I wanted to say hello to Dean. It's just been a pleasure. I haven't seen you in 25 years. Good. And Josh Mitchell's my Lebanese brother by another mother. In reference to your Lebanese tradition, and this is the part of the program, as they say, praise Allah, but first tie your camel to a post. This is the second where we tie the camel to a post. just been my way of introductions. I am joined by a couple of very special people, Will and Monica Crosley, who are the administrators of a real treasure in this country. It's the Piney Woods Day School, a black boarding school in Piney Wood, Mississippi, 20 miles from Jackson, Mississippi. And I spoke at their Founders Day, 113 years of continuous operation, where kids from very deprived families come there. It's devotional every day, no telephones, work requirement, and 98% of them graduate and go on to college. And so I want them to stand, please. And, when you're looking for an example of moral excellence, you can look no further. But the Woodson Center will be doing a lot of work because we need models in this country of excellence. I was a veteran of the civil rights movement, but I became disenchanted in that movement over the issue of forced busing for integration, because I said that the opposite of segregation is desegregation, not integration. But also I left the movement when I realized there was a bait and switch game going on. When we demonstrated outside of a pharmaceutical company, when they desegregated, they hired 9 black PhD chemists, and they refused to join the movement. They said they got this because they were qualified. And so I realized after several examples like that, that the civil rights movement had abandoned its moral foundation and became a part of the race grievance industry when the federal government attacked the institutions within the black community. Those mediating institutions were responsible for black America's survival. We prospered almost 100 years after slavery. In our 1776 Unites essays, we document the fact that the problems facing large numbers of blacks today with out-of-wedlock births and crime and unemployment are not the legacy of slavery and discrimination, that when whites were at their worst, blacks were at their best. We have one of our essays that looked at the plight of the family, of slave families. At the 6th plantation, they looked at their records. 75% of those families had a man and a woman raising children. And the nuclear family continued for 100 years, in 1930 to 1940, when racism was enshrined in law. We have the highest marriage rate of any other group. Elderly people could walk in their community without fear of being mugged or assaulted by their grandchildren. Children were not shot in their cribs. And so the center has documented this. So as I said, my migration from the civil rights movement in the 60s, because the $22 trillion we have spent on programs to aid the poor, the government invaded the black community, and these institutions that were there were just undermined and devastated. And so we, as I said, the first 100 years we prospered better than we did in the last 50 years under the government assault on the mediating institutions. And so I came to the Urban League, and that's when I met Peter Berger, my first conservative. Peter was meeting with Bob Nisbet and James Q. Wilson at the Lerman Institute when they were exploring mediating institutions. And so they invited 4 of us who are practitioners to interact with their scholars. And I remember getting into a 3-day fight with James Q. Wilson, because Jim was arguing, and I'm a practitioner. He was arguing that if you increase the cost of crime, crime will go down because people will weigh the consequence of their behavior. I said, well, in my world, that's like threatening a kamikaze pilot with death. Gang members don't think that way. And so I realized after 3 days that I was battling my empirical experience against his theories about how the world works. And then much to my surprise, Peter called me a week later and invited me to come to the American Enterprise Institute because they were establishing the mediating structures, and he wanted to. But what Peter did, And this is why, is that I had not written anything. I was a practitioner, but Peter used sociological tools to help me go back and examine a program in Philadelphia, my hometown, where the youth gang capital of America. They used to post their gang deaths next to the Vietnam deaths every year. But an enterprising woman and her husband found that the oldest of their sons was a gang member, and they invited him to bring his friends home. She said, I know nothing about gangs, but I know something about families. So why don't all 15 of you move in with my sons and daughters? They cleared out all the furniture, put mattresses down, and the House of Umoja was born. When kids found out there was sanctuary against gang violence, they came to live with them. She said, we have to work, be clean, and resolve our differences. They resolved the differences. They grew to 5 houses because they worked and retired the mortgages, and Umoja was born. But I was able to study this example of a mediating structure, and as a consequence, in 1974, there was a gang summit, and the whole city closed down because they said, if you bring all these gang members together, it'll be chaos. They canceled the Mother's Day parade. And they were successful. The city went down from 48 gang deaths down to 2 in 1 year and remained there. I was able to, under Peter Berger's guidance, go back and embed myself for 2 years to sit and listen to try to identify how they were able to bring about and promote that level of redemption. And so I thought that, and so afterwards, I wrote this book, A Summons to Life, that chronicled, with Peter's help, how a enterprising couple, through just the power of God's working through, was able to change a whole city. And so now that I knew what to look for, I went around the country, and I brought together 7 at American Enterprise, 7 of these Umoja types, and I asked them to bring 2 young men with them. Peter Berger, his wife, Brigitte, who was a renowned sociologist, and Dr. Robert B. Hill, the director of research, for 3 days sat in a room and asked probing questions of these young people. And so this was an excellent confluence of the street meeting with the streets, suites and streets, and using their skill to ask critical questions. We published a second book called Youth Crime and Urban Policy, A View from the Inner City, that reflected this interchange between the scholars and the practitioners, and the Vanderbilt Law Review gave it a positive review. And so I thought, now that I had found some strategic interest between the conservative movement and my grassroots leaders, that this would then be celebrated by the conservative movement, and that this would foretell a new way of approaching public policy that would be an answer to the liberals' assault on the mediating structures. But my hopes were dashed when the succeeding administrations walked away from it and treated it as if it was a sideshow. It became private sector initiatives under Reagan, 1,000 points of light under Bush. And so it just got sidetracked. And so for the past 40 years, the reason that I think the left has been successful in challenging this country's values is because the conservative movement did not engage and embrace mediating structures and championing it. And so that's what we have done at the Woodson Center for the past 41 years is we recognize that America, if it's to be saved, we must strengthen those existing mediating structures. And so if we say that 70% of black families are raising children that are dysfunctional, it means 30% are not. No scholars, either left or right, ever go into the low-income neighborhoods and ask affirmative questions. Not how many people are failing, but who is succeeding against the odds. And these are the social entrepreneurs. These are your Josephs. And so what we do is that you can learn nothing by studying failure except how to create failure. And so what we do is we do resilience studies. And this has brought us to the Josephs that you're going to meet today. That the grassroots leaders we really believe that the answer to this cultural war that we're in, that conservatives tend to take an ideological weapons to a narrative war. These represent empirical examples of American values in action. They are what James C. Scott called harbor masters. Episteme knowledge that you can teach in a classroom, you can teach someone to sail an ocean liner across an ocean. But when that ocean liner gets to the port of Baltimore, the captain turns it over to a local harbor master. That harbor master knows that one port. It doesn't know the port of New York. These grassroots leaders represent America's harbor masters. And what you're going to hear today is how they were able to answer the pastor's question. What are examples of conservative values in action? That if we want to really convince America as to the soundness of our principles and our virtues, we're not going to do it by having conferences and arguing about it on Fox. We have to demonstrate to them that it improves the quality of someone's life. As the servants of John the Baptist came to Jesus and said, "Are you the one, or shall we seek another?" Jesus didn't say, "Wasn't I born on Christmas?" He healed in their presence and said, "Go tell them what you saw." If we are to convince America of the soundness of our virtues and our values, we're not going to do it by arguing with the left. We're going to have to undermine their moral authority by pointing to the people they say in whose name they're acting, to speak for themselves and say. And so I want to present to you 4 examples of the 2,500 grassroots Josephs that the Woodson Center supports in 39 states. They're black, they're white, they're brown, they're red. When we get together for 41 years at conferences and retreat, we don't argue. Racial animus never came up once, am I right? Because everybody is more concerned about brokenness and how do we overcome our brokenness. So that's what we talk about. You're not a red junkie, black or white junkie, you're just a junkie. And you want to know what is your path towards redemption. And so I'm delighted to introduce you to some examples. And I'd say 80% of my closest friends have letters in front of their names, not behind them. I'll let you think about that one. But I want you to listen, because if these men and women can find redemption for themselves and use that personal redemption as a source of restoration of a whole community of people, then they have something to share with the country. And so, without any further ado, I want to introduce our panel. These are my friends. This is part of the Woodson family that I'm introducing you to. John Ponder has a group called Hope for Prisoners in Las Vegas, Nevada. John engages with people returning from prison. I want him to share his personal journey towards redemption and how he has used it. Andre Robinson from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who heads the Milwaukee Christian Center's violence-free zone program that has redeemed whole communities and schools. Gary Wyatt, he brought us out from Akron, Ohio. Gary recently, I wrote about through his leadership at the community when there was a police shooting of a citizen. It was one of the few cities that did not go up in flames because Gary and his wife, Pat, who's over here, Pat Wyatt. They had influence in the community, and when Black Lives Matter showed up to tear the city up, they were turned away. They were discouraged. But more important, Gary can talk about how he was able to be a liaison between the community suffering the problem, the mayor, the chief of police, and brought about a reasoned thing. Shows you the influence. And then last but not least, Sylvia Bennett Stone, who heads our Voices of Black Mothers United. Sylvia will share with you how she's brought together thousands of moms in these low-income communities who lost their children to violence. She lost her 16-year-old daughter, shot to death. She will share. But she has turned pain into purpose. And they are reflecting the reality. A lot of the people who say they speak on behalf of the Black community do not. 80% of Black Americans polled do not support defund the police. Only 60% of Blacks polled do not believe that racial animus or racial hostility is preventing them from achieving, which you would never know that. And so I bring to you today the voices of the people suffering the problem, but also have the solutions as well. So John, would you start off, please?
Absolutely, I will, and thank you, Bob. It's an honor to be here with you. Bob Woodson is my dear friend and my mentor, and he sits on the board of Hope for Prisoners. So I'm very honored to be here today, honored to be here with my colleagues. And Josh, what you did was so good. I was about to pass a collection plate around this. Oh my gosh, I'm talking about old school Pentecostals start running around the room. That was so good. So, by way of introduction, my name is John Ponder. I'm the founder and CEO of a ministry called Hope for Prisoners. And what Hope for Prisoners does is we work with men, women, and young adults that are exiting different arenas of our judicial system. Whether they're coming home from state or federal prisons, city, county jails, drug rehabs, halfway houses, transitional facilities, and the likes. And what we do is provide the supportive services to help the men and women that are returning back to the community not only get acclimated back into workplaces, but we make sure there's mechanisms in place through partnerships that we built up with employers that once they get inside those workplaces, they're going to be afforded every opportunity to thrive and be able to grow and afforded every opportunity to succeed. We address the needs for them to get acclimated back into their family, which has been a missed mark in reentry since forever. It's like no one's ever given the particular close attention to the men and women that are returning home, that they have to go back home to wives and husbands, and particularly to get reintegrated with their children. So we work as best we can to ensure that there's a mechanism in place to help with that family reunification piece, because I think I heard this today, everybody in this room can attest the fact that the family life is not right. If the home life is not right, then everything else in the world has a tendency to fall apart. And then on the back end of the process, because there's a long-term 18-month journey, we walk with them post-release, doing everything we possibly can to ensure that we're helping them to be stand-up leaders in the community with an overall goal of them never, ever, ever reoffending again. So Hope for Prisoners was birthed out of my own personal experiences. I was that guy who was coming in and out of the system since I was 12 years old. I've been in and out of every juvenile system in the state of New York, multiple jails, prisons in the state of New York. I did 2 prison terms in the state of Nevada. And then I got stretched out because I didn't learn my lesson. I got stretched out of the maximum security United States Federal Penitentiary, where I stood in the prison cell and surrendered my life to Jesus and came into a face-to-face encounter with him, asked him in that prison cell to step in and turn my life around. And he did, and sent me in a 180-degree turn in the other direction. And then implanted, I tell people he impregnated me with this vision of Hope for Prisoners, so that I could turn right back around and help the other men and women who are facing those same challenges I once had to face, in bondage to those same things that I once was in bondage to do everything I can to untie them from them things and help to be able to escort them up to the next level of life. So I founded Hope for Prisoners back in 2009 when I came home from prison. And since that time, we've had the great privilege of working with over 4,900 men and women who've been through our process. Of those 4,900 individuals, we've had the great privilege to work with, according to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, who came in and wanted to take a look at what it was that we're doing. What they determined was that 76% of those individuals were successful in gaining full-time employment and sustainable wage jobs. 25% of those were full-time employed within 17 days after they graduated our mechanism. And of those individuals we had the great privilege to work with, what University of Nevada, Las Vegas determined was that only 6% of those individuals went back to the prison system. I don't think there's another reentry mechanism in this country could say that they're putting up those kind of numbers. To be quite honest with you, I'm not satisfied with that number. My desire is to not to lose anybody. You know, there's a multitude of people coming out, and the Bible says that Jesus saw a multitude of people and he had compassion on them. But if you take a look at the national recidivism rate, I think it's up with 78% of people that go back to prison return within 3 years. I think that at that 6%, we're knocking it out of the ballpark. So how do we do it? Everything that we do starts out with very intensive pre-release vocational leadership training. And the reason why we do that, and I speak from own personal experiences, that the vast majority of people from this segment of the population, they really do want to change. They have no idea how to do it. So for so long, we've been telling people from this segment of the population to come home and be a productive member in the community. They have no idea what that looks like. Or we tell men, when we talk about family, we tell men to come home and take their rightful positions in their home as the husbands and fathers that God created them to be, and they have no healthy reference point up in here what that might look like. Or tell women the same thing. So what we do is we come alongside them, we train, equip them, and create healthy reference points in here that where they want to go, we show you how that exists. So after that intensive training, there's a uniqueness in what it is that we do, which is the cornerstone of our work. We, there's a graduation ceremony, but they don't graduate from some program. They graduate up into the next level of our commitment to be with them for the next 18 months or more. Not only help them to walk out all those incredible things that they've learned, but be able to be there with them to help them to navigate the different challenges they're going to be facing during this reintegration process. We do that through intensive case management and mentoring, which is a huge component of what it is that we do. And I can ask everybody in this room, if you ever ask anyone who has ever achieved any significant level of success in their life, how'd you do it? How did you get to where you are? If that person is honest with you, they're going to admit that they did not get them by themselves. They had people that were in their life guiding, directing, coaching, push, pulling, dragging, and sometimes kicking in the rear end every single step of the way. We are very honored that in our local community, we trained up over 600 men and women that have their boots on the ground that serve it as mentors. Now, these are pastors and leaders from churches across Southern Nevada. These are business owners and business leaders. These are school teachers from our school district to professors over at university, right down to the, watch my smile, right down to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, where the sheriff has given us an army of volunteer police officers that are serving as mentors. Show you how big our God is. Never before in the history of reentry, nowhere on this planet to this magnitude has law enforcement gotten this involved in mentoring and training people coming home from our prison system. And it's causing such a win-win on both sides of the equation. Let me explain to you why, and this is why it's so critically important. This is why other police departments are looking for us to replicate our model across the country. You see, our goal is to help men and women return back to the community after they paid their debt to society.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me say that one more time.
Yeah,
they
that's
paid
right.
their debt to society. And we want them to get out in the community. We want them to never reoffend again. Right? In order for us to be able to do that, we have to instill in them a love, appreciation, respect for the rules and regulations of our land. And my dear mentor told me many years ago, once a person's character changes, the characteristic has to follow. Right? But what we did was we brought them in relationship with the men and women who are upholding the law. And that has caused a win-win on both sides of the equation. And what that level of partnership is doing is forcing men and women from law enforcement to do what it is that they talked about for years, this community engagement or community policing, but bringing them in relationship with them, it's helping them to view the formerly incarcerated people from a whole nother set of lenses. And I'm going to say this one other thing, and I'm going to pass it off to my colleagues and tell you why this is so important. And when we started talking about the dislike for the defund the police, right, I was going to get up and run around the room. And let me tell you the reason why. The challenge that we face in our nation today, reflective of what happened in the summer of 2020, people don't trust the police. People clash with the police. There's this disdain for the police. They don't trust them. But the reason why they don't trust police is because they're not in relationship with them. In what relationship could you ever establish trust with anybody unless there's life rubbing up against life in the spirit of complete transparency? That's when we realize that we have more in common than we have differences. So out of that life rubbing up against life and transparency, that comes the relationship. And until there's a relationship there, you will never have trust. And I'm going to put a pin in there right there, and I'm going to pass it off to back
John,
to you.
I have just one question I want you to answer. Well, first of all, in talking to the police department, they said that negative encounters between the minority community and the police are dramatically down in Las Vegas as a consequence of this. But John, perhaps you can share who were your mentors when you came out. That I think is a little unusual, if you would.
Sure. Besides Bob Woodson, I had the great privilege of being mentored, and he's one of my best friends to this day, was the FBI agent that took me into custody. He came alongside me, poured his life into me, kind of blew wind into Hope for Prisoners, and that spawned, if I could do this with this law enforcement person, how can I replicate this with others? So the district attorney who prosecuted me, he's my dear friend. The federal judge that sentenced me to prison, 2 weeks ago, I was in San Diego fishing with him on his boat. You know, there's this saying that we have, if we can, and I try to share this with people in you know, from the judicial system, but this can work in politics. Have you ever thought about how close that word enemy comes to the inner me? And I tell people all the time how I spent a lifetime fighting enemies on the outside until I took a look at the enemies that were laying dormant on the inner me. And once I conquered the enemies on the inner me, the enemies on the outside disappeared. This is why I could very comfortably say, guy who was ex-gang affiliated, walked away from the gang 17 years ago, guy who was strung out and addicted to everything known to man. I've been clean and sober for 17 years. Amen. And this is why I can say that some of the men and women from law enforcement, they're my best friends. That's when I realized, for me, it was never the police. It was always what was going on the inner me. Conquered them, now they're my best friends.
I think C.S. Lewis had something to say about the prison being locked from the inside, right?
Yeah.
Andre?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I want to thank Pete and especially Melissa, because she took care of so many things when it comes down to travel and lodging and all that stuff that I struggle with every time I try to travel. So thank you both very much. Thank you, everyone else. Andre Robinson, I am the director of the Violence Free Zone in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The program is in 11 high schools and 2 middle schools. There are 8 mentors in each high school that deal with all of the young people that everybody else is afraid to work with. So when we talk about that gang leader from down the block that happens to run the first floor inside their high school, he in room 322, who's gonna talk to him? You know, the teacher is afraid of him. The principals are afraid of him. The safety aides, the security aides are afraid of them. So in walks Violence Free Zone, and the one thing that we do is, for one, we're not afraid because we came from the same place as he came from. All right, we understand where he's coming from. We understand what he's done. We've done some of those things too. When we first started, in 2005, there was a school called South Division High School, and it's still there, and we're still in it. It was tagged the most violent high school in Milwaukee. There were 13 different gangs inside of this building with an enrollment of about 1,400 students. 13 different gangs with 1,400 students. We're looking at close to 30% of the enrollment. All right, so there's an issue. You have faculty who don't understand the gang culture. You have administrators who don't understand the gang culture, and you have a security or safety division that is afraid of the gang culture. In walks Bob Woodson to Milwaukee. Mind you, he had been there prior to, I just didn't know him then. All right, he had been working with gangs in the community and working on finding mentors to build truces between these gangs. I didn't know him then because I was too busy writing grants. You know, and it's coming from a former, well, I'll get to that later. But I was too busy writing grants, so I didn't know about that. But in the very next 6 to 8 months, I was no longer writing grants. I had been downsized, so to speak, and so I took that time to like listen to some of my mentors. So there's one guy, he told me, he says, everybody calls me Dre, no one calls me Andre except my mom. You know, but he says, Dre, you underestimate your influence and your ability to work and talk with young people. And I guess I never really thought about it, you know, because I was never asking for anything back from it. I only knew that when I was coming up, I needed one of me, and I didn't have one of me.
Yeah.
You know, all of my people, all of my mentors, all of my credible messengers were drug dealers, gangbangers, you know, and that's what was popular. That's what was exciting to us at that point. And so I followed them. I wanted to make sure that from that point forward, once I did whatever I did, got out of whatever I did, figured out what was next, that I was going to be the change for someone like me that was coming up. And I volunteered for a year working as I don't know if you call it youth mentor or I don't know what you call it then, because I was just so engaged, so involved in it that it consumed me during the day, and I just wanted to make sure that I'm there for them. And as time went on, I met Bob Woodson. You know, he walks into Milwaukee and he comes to this agency called the Latino Community Center. He says, I'm looking for agencies that are doing the work but aren't getting paid for the work. I said, that's me. That's me. You know, and so he started talking about this motto called the violence-free zone that was working on the East Coast, that was developed in Philly. And I listened to it and I'm like, wow, to use people from the community to work with the community, man, that's like common sense. All right, and I say common sense with a bit of hesitancy because one of the things, and today I've heard the term common sense a lot, and being in this field, doing what we do, the one thing that I have learned is that there's no such thing as common sense. All right, no such thing as common sense. Common sense is to you what it is to you because of where you come from and what your experiences were. Common sense to a young person that has never seen or experienced those same things that you experience, it's going to be totally different. So our sense of common sense and their sense of common sense are two totally different things. So when you say common sense, please understand that it is separatist. So think to yourself before you say that, because we don't have the same lineage, we don't have the same background. And a lot of times when you say things like that, you can push people away that would normally be drawn to what you're offering them. And now those are things that as mentors we have to think about, because we walk into these environments with our own ideas about what works, what doesn't work, what worked for us. But guess what? Just because it worked for you doesn't mean it's going to work for them. My experience is not your experience, so I will never tell a young person, I know what you're going through. I do not know what you're going through. I know what I went through. And my situation is very similar to yours. But guess what? I had a loving mom. She was there 100% of the time. She worked 3 jobs to do whatever she needed to do for me. All right? I had other people that I could go to or that looked up, that offered me opportunity when I probably didn't think I deserved that opportunity. Yeah. You didn't. So I don't know what you're going through. But let me show you how I came out of some of the situations that sound like yours. You know, and then that's you're building that trust and that rapport. Back to the whole violence-free zone thing. 13 different gangs inside of this building, 3 people charged with going into the school and seeing what's up, seeing what we can do, what's next, how we do this. We just sat, we just observed 3 months. 3 months, observed. Just walked around, we saw who was there, we saw who the players were, who the leaders were, we took notes. When they got in trouble, the administration said, hey, we got some people in this building we want you to meet. They brought them to us. First 2 people they brought to us were the two gang leaders of the biggest gangs inside the school. Wow, I just was happy, you know, I just reached my hands together and said, all right, we got this. So we get them 2 in a room. We find out that they have issues, that they have beef, they're fighting every day, you know, and I say, where your lockers at? My lockers are on the 3rd floor by 322. All right, where your lockers at? My lockers are on the 3rd floor by 348. Okay, so that's why you're fighting every day. You're in that close a proximity, and nobody's noticing that. Let's go back to the principal and say, hey, how about you move this group's lockers to the 1st floor? It is something that simple that stopped 50, 60 fights in a year. But guess what? I can't really document that.
Yeah.
How do I quantify what didn't happen because of my intervention? All right, and that's an issue. That's an issue because we're making things happen, we're stopping things from happening, but it's the stuff that goes unnoticed, untouched.
Yes.
You know, but once we got those 2 gang leaders, we worked something out for them. We made things happen for them. They understood who we were. They understood that they could trust who we were and where we came from. We had the whole school. So I don't have to worry about the other 11 gangs. I got the 2 biggest ones. Let me get these 2 leaders. We get an assembly in an auditorium with the other 11. That's all I want. I don't want your sets. I don't want your gang members. I don't want your lieutenants. I don't want your captains. I just want your leaders in this room. Let's work out a truce in this room. Let's say that if we need to separate floors, we need to get you in the basement. We need to get you here, or we need to meet every 2 weeks, all 13 of us. Let's do that. You have issues within your sets. You have issues outside of your sets. You make sure you come to us and you talk to us about it so that we can mediate and work this out. In 1 year, South Division became the safest school in the district. Let me say this, though. It did not become the safest school in the district just because we were there. It became the safest school in the district because while we were there, we understood how to build relationships with every other entity in that building. All right, so now we got teachers working with teachers, talking about these 2 gangs and their activity and what's going on. We got principals understanding that you can't just discipline and suspend everything away. How about we sit down and do group mediations? We got coaches that want to buy into this process because they see that it also works with them being coaches. All right, so once you get all of these entities within one building working together and understanding that they can actually make some things happen when they're together, Kyle, you got a much safer school. You got a much safer school, you got people working together. I can go all day, but I got a couple more things that I want to say, and I'm going to say that when I was a youth advisor, and the way that our program is built up is there are youth advisors who we're all mentors, but youth advisors are the mentors who have 25 to 30 young people on their caseload. Then you have lead youth advisors who have between 15 and 20 youth advisors on their caseload, and they work with the youth advisors to make sure that they're following protocols and all of that stuff. And then you have a site supervisor who has no caseload, but does all the administrative stuff within the building, builds all the relationships with the core group of administrators and faculty. What it boils down to is I have 40 students in 2008. That was my last year of being a youth advisor. Out of those 40 students, I know where 38 of them are right now. I was just at the wedding of one of theirs last week. I'm the godfather to 7 of their children. I have 6 of them that were in violence-free zone as mentees of mine are now working back with violence-free zone. Whether it's directly or indirectly, they're doing something. There is one in particular, Vanessa, 4'7", Latina, super strong, independent. She was one of the gang leaders at South Division, 4'7", and she has like 60 girls that are following her. She comes up to me and she says, Dre, you know, like, this was like 5, 6 years ago. She says, I would have never made it without you. You know, I don't know what I would have done if you weren't there for me. And guess what I'm doing right now? I says, what are you doing? She says, I've been doing PR for, there's a bank. I don't know if it's a national bank, PNC Bank. But she says, I'm doing PR for a PNC Bank. That was 5, 6 years ago. 3 weeks ago, she calls me and she says, Dre, I've been promoted. I am over all accounts from $1 million to $15 million. She says, so I want to talk to your executive director. You know, and that's pretty cool. And she also comes back to Violence Free Zone to do financial literacy for all of our students. So it's like, it's full circle. And if you're willing to invest, you will definitely recoup.
Byron Johnson and Baylor University was the first institution that came in, and evaluated. But South Division, as he said, went from one of the most violent to the most peaceful. And so did Pulaski School. And Byron and his staff came in, did a 3-year study comparing the schools with our program and with those without it. And they said suspensions are down, expulsions are down. It's just all of the numbers are down. So it just demonstrated that even in the most trouble, if you support choice in education, then you got to support public schools and making them competitive too. I think it's a mistake for us to be, I'm a strong supporter of choice and vouchers, but if you support choice, you should also make the public schools competitive as well. And so I persuaded the Bradley Foundation, conservative foundations, to invest in this program to improve. So I think as conservatives, it's important for us to be pro. Most of the children are not going to go to private schools. Therefore, we should make a serve. And supporting grassroots leaders like Andre and others in that city, it's a model that we're taking around the country. But it's very difficult to get people to invest in it. Because it wasn't invented by professionals. Gary Wyatt from Akron, Ohio, will share with you, and then Sylvia. Then we'll take questions.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm always honored to be amongst great people, and the hospitality that we have gotten at Pepperdine is amazing. I kind of put it up on Facebook. You know, in Ohio, our elections is big, especially in Akron. So I put this school of policy, so I'm looking to get a job when I get back. After they see what college I just came from. I'm getting all these hits by policemen and all kind of people talking about, you out there? I've seen that Amelia Sykes, who's running for Congress, had been out here before, so it popped up on Facebook. I said, man, so I'm really honored to be here. And, you know, when I'm in a crowd like this, I always feel like the least of these. You know, Bob, hold your book up, Bob. That was one of the many books he wrote by Bob Woodson, The Least of These. Yeah. You know, I always felt like the least of these, like, Lord, what do I have to offer? What do I have to bring to the table? And it kind of reminded me of everybody in here. One of the doctors said earlier that we all got gifts. We all in this room together for a reason, and I'm telling you, years ago we would have never all been sitting in the same room, especially talking about integrating some type of faith base. But my story is a little bit different. I'm an ex-dope dealer. You know, when Bob said, you know, the front of the name and that you got these letters at the back, well, I'm ex something. We all are ex something, whether you're ex sinners, you ex this, you ex that. You know, some of y'all might be ex lawyers, but probably not here. But my story is basically from dealing to healing. Like Dr. Michael said, I'm gonna give a short version on this real quick. I don't have time to talk about it, but I do have free copies here at the end. You can read the story. And all our stories are in Bob's books, The Least of These. So he got tons of stories in there that you might want to take out and just kind of look. But anyway, I came from a dysfunctional, broken family, mom an alcoholic. That was pills back then. And but she was a great mom, like Andre said. She was a great mom. And I went off to the Navy in the 80s, 85 to 89. I went to active duty. And so, matter of fact, my last ship sitting down in San Diego, the USS Midway, that was the last ship I was on. So it was 4,500 of us on there. So I kind of learned a little bit about gangs, learned a little bit about life and just the big cities coming from Little Akron. So when I got out in the 90s, I messed around. It was when Clinton was in and the war on drugs came around, and I messed around and got, that's when that crack cocaine came out in the late 80s. And I got curious. I couldn't understand what crack, how it could just turn somebody out, and cocaine, it went from cocaine in the 80s, and then it all of a sudden, from Richard Pryor using it, freebasing it, to being changed chemically in the 90s to smoking it, you know what I mean? So I messed around and started snorting a little bit in the 90s, messed around and graduated to the pipe, started smoking cocaine, and to the point I was smoking over $1,200 a week. And mind you, I'm still with the same woman. We was just dating. And, we just started off selling a little bit, we just wanted to come up a little bit, get a few items, get me a little beat up Cadillac. I just wanted to come up a little bit. It wasn't like I was shipping it in. It wasn't like I was bringing it in from there. I was just getting it after somebody else flew it in, after somebody else kind of brought it in. So I messed around and got strung out on the same drugs that I was selling. I went from just normal smoking to the point it was like one hit is too much and 1,000 hits ain't enough. That's what crack would do to you. And so after I got strung out, it was for a short period of time in the 90s. And then I turned around, and after the Lord delivered me from drugs, after I had got saved in the faith base, when I got changed that night, I had been out for 3 days on crack cocaine. And I said, Lord, if you get me off these drugs, I promise you. It was amazing how God had saved me in the same neighborhood where I actively had 3 dope houses running. I got saved in a little Baptist church, got saved, cleansed my heart, and asked the Lord to come in and change me. And it's been 30 years now I've been clean from crack cocaine. 30 years I've been clean. And so when we talk about sometimes trying to put numbers and just trying to package that up for a foundation, all I could say is, I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. It's this amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. So I was in front of a foundation one time, so she was saying, well, what do you guys do? And sometimes it's difficult for us to explain in numbers what we do. That's why we need the Bob Woodsons of this world, because he know how to talk to the pharaohs. He know how to talk. He know how to articulate. You know what I'm saying? I said, Bob, can you find a word for this? Because I can't quite articulate what I'm trying to tell this foundation. The lady was saying, how you put a number to that? I said, well, I was lost, but now I'm found. I was strung out and now I'm changed. So she said, no, how you put a number? I said, well, I can tell you how you put a number. If you would give us this funding, I promise you I would duplicate myself and at least another 100 people. So that'll change the whole community so that these same people don't have to come out in your neighborhood and get your kids and deal with some of the stuff that we're dealing with from all these drugs now. So God gave me the gift after I got off drugs. We started a community house, and then the Lord, because I had that leadership in the community, we was dealing with a lot of gangs in Akron, just youth violence. So I started leading that task, having outreaches, and all of a sudden I started building relationships with the police department to the point where, and the city officials, and got to meet the mayors, and somebody messed around and changed the way the Knights Foundation do business and put a community person. They put me on there. And so somehow I got elected because they wanted to change, just like they need to change policy. They wanted to change the way the Knights Foundation was thinking. Well, you got everybody out here, all these lawyers, all these high profile. Where's the people that we serving? Okay, we need to put money into the community, but where's the people at that's disaffecting? Shouldn't we have somebody at the table? So they messed around and put me at the tables. I was on there with doctors, lawyers, and all kind of people. And I'm thinking, here you go, I'm the least of these, like a Joseph. You know what I'm saying? What I got to bring to the table. So I'm sitting here, I said, Lord, you got a plan for me. So as the Lord put me on that panel, I began to meet a lot of people to where it opened up doors with the mayor's office and just building relationships. So bringing it up to speed now, what's been going on Akron with, you know, the violence and all of this and that, we messed around and we had a shooting by the police in this summer. Y'all know the Jalen Walker thing in Akron, Ohio. And one of the reasons that we did not burn, our city did not burn, is because the relationship that our mayor had with the community. We strong on community and building relationships. And how it started was our captain, she was trying to get a bunch of people together to deal with some violence. So she brought me to the table. She said, Gary, you know anybody that could come to the table? I brought him in the room, a big old dude, you know, just the police captain looked at him like, don't I know you? You know, it's like they looked at each other. But I'm telling you, that was one of the best conversations, the best group that we had. So we brought that together. I was able to do that. And as a result of the mayor, he went to the black church and he brought us all together, was talking about these issues going on in Akron. We recommended body cams. They enacted body cams to be released within 8 days. Akron was one of the first cities that actually did that, followed by other people. And then they brought in the Department of Justice to help mediate just in case, you know, we could be brokers. And so it's amazing, just in closing, that I never, like Bob said, no, what it is, you just never got caught. I just retired from the U.S. Postal Service after 34 years. I kept my job. Bob said, what it was, you never got caught. But what my point I'm making is, it's amazing how God put me back in the delivery business. I delivered mail for 10 years, you know, and I ended up retiring as a manager and also retired in 2019 from the Navy. So all these skill sets God has brought me to the table. All of this stuff, whatever God did in my life, brought me to Bob Woodson. And I didn't meet Bob Woodson like y'all. You know, you just like, you know, yeah, Bob, this. I met Bob because we snuck into an event like this. In '98, they brought him in, Governor Bob Taft, for What Works and Welfare Why. Everybody, all these groups came in, big urban leagues and all that. But what about the people that's making an impact in the community? So I went down there with a guy, and he was like, yeah, man, you got to come down there and meet this guy named Bob Woodson. And, man, when they snuck us, when we got down there, he opened the door. He's like, come on, let's go. We went on in, and we sat in the audience, and I let Bob tell that point. So, but I just want to say thank you. Grab a book. It's free over there. My wife got them, and you can finish the rest of the story. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Gary. And now, final panelist, Sylvia Bennett Stone.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sylvia. Always introduce myself as the one that's from Long Island, New York, lives in Birmingham, Alabama, and works out of Washington, D.C. So I'm world-renowned. I am director of Voices of Black Mothers United. We are a project of the Woodson Center out of Washington, D.C. How I came into this role was bitter, hard, but yet I'm here, and I thank God for making it sweet now. And I'll share with you the sweet part of it, and that is the healing. The fact that I'm able to stand before you now, and I can breathe, and I can smile, and I can say I have the ability to try to help someone else make it through the most horrific thing a person, a human being, could go through, and that is the burial of your child. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I went through the ranks of being an exec with the Y, and then a little short stint of the Urban League, until I decided I wanted to take an innovative approach to helping our community, helping our youth, in particular juvenile offenders, which started my organization, Innovative Approach Foundation. That's where we develop programs for youth in the court system as an alternative to incarceration. We did that throughout the state of Alabama and some in the state of Georgia. We were the largest running juvenile offender organization in the state of Alabama. 2004, my worst nightmare happened. I got a phone call, and my daughter had went out for the 4th of July, going to her brother's, stopped at the gas station to get gas, got caught in a crossfire of guys shooting at each other. The bullet went through my daughter's car, went through her body, and stopped in the heart of her girlfriend, and both girls died. I thought that would be the day that I died too. You know, I often had heard in services, church services, the devil comes in to steal, kill, and destroy. And I felt at that point, he killed my daughter, was stealing my life and destroying everything around me. I went from being my brother's and sister keeper to needing to be kept. How do you do that? There was no roadmap for that. There was no one there to teach me how to breathe again, because I'm on the floor with panic attacks. There was no roadmap to help me sleep, stop the nightmares, stop the anger that the emotions that you just don't normally feel that are there. There was no roadmap for that. I was also a community affiliate member of the Whitson Center, had been for years. Did financial literacy for the center and so many different things that I've learned over the years from the Whitson Center, in particular Mr. Bob Whitson. Something God told me to try to get back in the fold. And I later found out that I wasn't alone. There was so many other mothers that did not have a roadmap. How do you survive? How do you heal? I always have this saying that if the mother heals, the family heals. The family heals, the community heals. Because everyone was watching me. If I was angry, everyone stayed angry. Now keep in mind my prior work, right? I dealt with juvenile offenders. Some of them went on to become adult offenders. Some of them heard about what happened to me and said, you didn't deserve this. We got you. I'm like, no, don't get me. Don't do that. We do not want to incite more violence, because what it does is just continues and retaliation, all of the above. So no, don't get me. Let's handle this the right way. So I went to Mr. Whitson on a meeting, and he said, where you been? And I told him my story. And I told him there's so many more mothers out there like me that don't have a voice, and people want us to be quiet. So after the funeral and the food goes away, they want you to disappear with your story too. Well, I wasn't going to do that. And most of the mothers that I work with will not do it either. My daughter's name deserved to be heard. She was a good girl, good citizen. Both of the girls were. And I just wasn't going to go away just like that. Nor was I able to continue to turn on the news and watch so many other mothers wail with that pain. Every time I heard that pain, I was traumatized all over again. So Mr. Whitson said, well, you know what? You're right. You're not being heard. And at the same time, I was challenged by this other organization that told me I was diluting their message.
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
At the time, it was the 4th of July. A family, a young mom and her 3 children went to the mall to get their children 4th of July outfits. Guys got to shooting in the mall. So that could have been any one of you all that could have been in that mall that day. But the bullet happened to catch an 8-year-old in the back of his head, and he died. Well, the community was up in arms. Everyone was upset, angry, needing something to happen other than being angry.
Yeah.
During the same time was the rioting and the tearing up of the streets of Black Lives Matter. They went on live with their matter, with their agenda. I went on live trying to calm the public down about this baby's death. And that we need to come up with solutions.
Yeah.
We need to turn that anger into purpose.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, they came over the top and told me I need to be quiet because I'm diluting their message. That didn't go over well with me at all. And thank God for Mr. Whitson and his voice of reason
Right.
to say, Sylvia, I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but we're going to do this on a national level,
Yeah.
and we're going to put all the mothers' voices in front of the people to be heard. And birthed out of that was Voices of Black Mothers United.
Yeah.
We're not even 2 years old yet, but we're in 24 states as state leads with mothers who's lost children to violence, who turned their pain into purpose, organized, and now advocating for mothers within those states and those cities. There's over 10,000 of moms on the ground. And what do we do? We go into our communities where mothers are having to deal with the death of their children or fear of death of their children. We go in and we bring about solutions. What do those solutions look like? Mr. Whitson always talk about coming from the ground up, and those who are mostly affected are the ones with the solutions. We were the ones affected, and we're the ones that's bringing forth that voice of reasoning and that solutions, hoping to curb the violence in these communities. We do food drives. We try to help alleviate some of the pressures of the families within the communities. Believe it or not, you have so many kids out there who don't eat every day. You have so many teenagers who are responsible for feeding their siblings, which caused them to steal, caused them to do, not justify, caused them to sell drugs. Their parents may be absent or on drugs themselves. Case in point, one of the young men in our GED class, we would do pizzas every Thursday if they had good attendance. He would never eat his pizza. He'll always say, Miss Stone, let me wrap it up. or he'd be the last one there to help me clean up and say, can I take the leftovers home? And it was only because they didn't have anything to eat. And he was in juvenile court because of stealing. Okay, so we go in, we do the food drives, we plant the trees, we do the neighborhood cleanups, we instill hope into our communities, hope into our youth, to say you don't have to be this person that you're so angry, that you don't care about your life or the life of anyone else's. That's what we do from our heart. That's our healing process. And the more we help and we give into those communities, the stronger we become. And try dealing with a mother who knows that she has the moral authority to say enough is enough in our community. We are the candy lady, we're the confidant, we're the ones who do disciplinary. We are the mothers in our community. So we try to instill that value. We also have the relationships in our community. We have the law enforcement. Our first line of partnership is the law enforcement. We cannot do this without them. Mr. Woodson quoted earlier, 80% of our communities want law enforcement in our communities. We're just the ones bold enough to say it because what? We have that moral authority. And we represent that 80%, and we bring that partnership together so they can get to know the law enforcement as well as law enforcement get to know them. And in that case, you have a partnership there to where now there's trust. Now I can talk to you because I know Officer Joe is not going to hurt me. And Officer Joe know that he's not going to be hurt.
Well, thank you. Just a quick footnote. Part of what the Voices of Black Mothers have done, we've taken out a full-page ad in USA Today supporting the police. We also are embedded in 5 homicide departments so that when there is a murder, one of the mothers responds to help to reduce all the drama at the scene and produce closer relationship between the police. And as a consequence, in those 5 cities, the closure rate on homicides is dramatically increased because of the trust the mothers help build between the community. So they're very practical, preventive things that they're doing. They had over 150 kids take the pledge of no violence in a major campaign. So this is just really spreading. But these let me just, I know time is of the essence. Take any questions?
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes.
10 minutes, we could take some questions. I want to thank our panelists. Yes, sir.
Thanks so much, first of all. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the question of scale and scaling, you know, and the tensions there. I mean, I feel like on the one hand, we hear these stories, and I think everyone in the room is saying, we want more of this, right? And of course, what nonprofit leader is secretly hoping someone's going to come with $1 million or $10 million and say, can you scale this? It'd be very hard to say no. But on the other hand, everything I hear, I think this is so beautiful, and it is not necessarily something that just could be assembly line produced. You know, both the leaders that you are as individuals, but also what you are bringing about is rooted in relationship. It's about listening. It's spiritual life. Those are things that, you know, not only would be hard to scale, but something critical might be lost in a scaling process. So I'd just love to hear your reflections on that.
Let me just respond, because when we started in Milwaukee, we started in one school with private dollars, with South Division, and we did what we call a climate survey, the attitude of teachers about fear. Because they were so effective in 6 months, other principals said, we want the program. So within a year, we went to 3 schools. They were so effective, then we went to 14 schools. We've also exported this to other cities as well. In Washington, D.C., where it got started, There were 53 gang murders in a 5 square block area in one year. We supported a group that went in and brought just 16 young men to my office for a truce. And we turned these predators into ambassadors of peace. And they went back, and for 12 years, we didn't have a single murder in that community. And the Chevron Corporation, we started in some schools. The Chevron said, we want to give you $1 million. What can you do with it? Well, we took it, but it had to be spent in 1 year, which is crazy. But our staff responded and went to 5 schools in the city with the same dramatic results, where the principal said there were a child every week going to the hospital injured in a fight. But since the violence-free zone has been there, we haven't had one ambulance call. Well, we looked at the numbers. It takes $6,000 a day for someone going into the ICU. We figured out how many days that they would normally spend if the kids were going. And then we looked at what the cost return was by investing in the program. And so we had the numbers, and we were prepared to go, our groups could go into 10 schools. The problem is, because these programs are being done by untutored people,
Not doctors.
and it's not invented by professionals, there was no investment. And so the biggest problem we fight is elitism. This notion that untutored is unwise and therefore unfundable. So that's the biggest challenge that we fight, the image, because these are coming from people who aren't trained or credentialed to do that, as if certification is synonymous with qualification. It isn't. But it's a hard sell.
Yeah.
Okay.
One more question. I was just going to follow up on the same one. So you were able to scale
Yes,
because you're producing your own
and measured it.
workforce. So the scaling is not because the program is centralized and it's because you create new centers. Is that how you were able to do 5 or 10?
Yeah, the trick is to find credible messengers, people that have the moral authority that engenders trust, and the qualities that make them effective makes them invisible, because they're not the ones out complaining or protesting.
Right.
You have to be like a Geiger counter and go in and find them, because they're too busy serving to be protesting.
Yeah. That's
So part of what we have to do is, but they're there, and our frustration is we can take it to scale. Byron Johnson we also don't have many scholars. We've created islands of excellence, like in 12 years, one public housing project in Washington, D.C. really mobilized, and the people, they sent 600 kids to college in 12 years from one public housing project. There was not one scholar that came in to study the success of it. If you want to see an example, we work with 60 Minutes. If you write this down, Bertha Gilkey, 60 Minutes, go to YouTube, Bertha Gilkey, 60 Minutes. We worked for 3 months with Suzanne St. Pierre. She's the wife of Eric Severide, who was a producer. In this one community in St. Louis, where the residents took over and do exactly what they're doing, and we were able to get the investment. It transformed that whole community. Eric Severide did a 23-minute segment on Cochrane, how it became the most peaceful area. Again, it was never sustained because there was no institution came to evaluate it. Not one time. You would think that conservative scholars interested in mediating structures would rush in and say, let us generate some numbers. And that's what I hope to come out of this relationship, that if we want to push back against with the left, we have to do more than complain about what they're doing. We have to demonstrate to them that we have superior strategies. That as conservatives, we're really poor about marketing principles. Ralph Nader is a genius because he understands the importance of symbol to idea. So if he wants the Congress to change policies on auto safety, he brings a blood-stained, wrinkled fender of a Pinto and the weeping parents of a teenager who was killed in a wreck. And then he says, here's the policies I want changed. We're standing next to him, 4 white guys in blue suits with data. Who wins that struggle? We have to stop taking ideological weapons to a narrative fight. What they represent are narrative. What they represent is proof positive that the values and virtues of this nation are alive and well. And so we must proliferate. There are thousands of people like this. We have to join in common community. Conservative, members of the Conservative Academy has to join. And one thing you'll find about the thousands of people that they are not confused about their pronouns.
That's right.
God bless you.